Yeah, thank you everybody again for being here. I want to just get into the meat and potatoes of the meeting right now with our keynote address. And I want to welcome our speakers, Mark Post and Yankee Modi. Mark is a functional, typological, historical, and a descriptive linguist, and he works mostly on the Tani branch of the Trans-Himalayan languages. He's currently a senior lecturer and deputy head of the School of Humanities at the University of Sydney, and he's a co-director for the Center for Cultural Linguistic Diversity, and we're going to hear a lot about that today. Yankee Modi wrote a grammar of Milang, same family, that's her heritage language, and she got her PhD in, I think, 2017 in Bern. And she also is currently in Sydney, a research fellow at the University of Sydney, and also co-director of the Center for Linguistic Diversity, Eastern Himalaya, and a founding member of the Milang Language Development Committee. And both Mark and Yankee have, without probably knowing it, been a great influence on me personally because of their work in Northeast India, specifically at the Northeast Indian Linguistic Society meetings and with the communities there, and the way in which both of them have engaged with native-speaking linguists, providing training in documentary linguistics and in really community engaged linguistic work, and watching all of that, including all of the great work that has happened at the Niels conference in Guwahati. I feel like over the years, I've really been influenced by that, and a lot of the things that I brought to CoRSAL, along with the others who have been here, I think come from that. So I'm really pleased that they're here to share about their center. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Shobhana. I feel very, I'm sure Yankee also feels a little bit taken aback hearing that you've been influenced by us, because we've certainly, we're the ones who really should be saying that in so many ways. I think your grammar was assigned to me by Scott Delancey as a model grammar that I should strive to emulate when I was a second year MA student, and I sort of have been with it ever since. So thank you so much for that generous introduction. I'm going to try to share the screen as best I can. There's a few different ways of doing this, I think, so just bear with me. Share screen, and with any luck, you guys will just see a slide now. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. So we're off and running. So yes. So how we've planned this? I'm going to start talking. Then Yankee's going to start talking. Then I'll sort of finish, and we'll hopefully have plenty of time for discussion. But we'd like to talk about community linguistics in general, but mainly focusing on what we've been doing with our Center for Cultural Linguistic Diversity in the Eastern Himalaya, which is, so I say CCLD just out of habit, but it's actually the CCLD EH. So it's the Center for Cultural Linguistic Diversity in the Eastern Himalaya. And if you're curious, if this is the first time you're hearing about us, please click on the web link, obviously, when you actually have access to the slides, not on your screen. And you can sort of browse around and see, but we'll give you a quick overview of the programs that we run, sort of talk about how they work, their motivation. So it's sort of an umbrella organization linking a program, Training and Resources for Indigenous Community Linguists, or TRICL, which we've been running since 2015 or 16, with the exception of the COVID years, of course. And a more recent program that we're going to focus on, especially Yankee's going to outline, fellowships for Indigenous community researchers. And then we have some other things we do that are either not as well developed or not as interesting, so I'll just leave those to the side. We'll mainly focus on the first two. So who is this, are we, etc. So Yankee and myself are co-directors, but then just as involved are Jilpa Modi from Rajiv Gandhi University, Arunachal Institute for Tribal Studies, who's our assistant program director. So she's sort of putting together all the programs on the ground. and Kellen Parker Van Dam, who I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say anything about his affiliation now. We'll let him reveal that, but historically at the University of Zurich. So he's our associate academic director, ex-student of Stephen Morey's, and extremely active in that same part of the Northeast, the sort of Tongsa area. So very much involved. So I'm going to give a little bit of background, why we're doing whatever it is we're doing, sort of thinking about what problems we're trying to solve, and talk about how we operate. And then Yankee's going to outline some of the outcomes that we think we've achieved so far. And I'll finish with the sort of looking ahead. So why are we doing any of this? Well, the Eastern Himalaya, we've sort of argued in different contexts, is really an ethno-linguistic diversity hotspot. I think at a global scale, of course, when you compare anything to Papua New Guinea, you sort of blush, right? Because the diversity of a place like that is just blows your mind. But of course, that's how the world used to be more generally. Papua New Guinea is just sort of still like that. But there are these sort of zones, right, where some of the I don't know, what should I call it? Remnants of the world's once extraordinary ethno-linguistic diversity are sort of still there. So it's sort of a hotspot in that respect. We've got 5 language families, depending on how you consider language families to be. But it's not just that there's all these various language families. Within the Trans-Himalayan family, this is by far and away the center of diversity. There's just an extraordinary number, not only of languages, of which there, who knows, there may be 300 to 400, but they fall into many different phyla. So there's just an extraordinary amount of diversity here, by mainland Asian standards, at least. And I think it has special ethno-linguistic significance. So these are not simply numbers of languages. They're sort of significant on a global scale. So in terms of Trans-Himalayan, so take these phylogenetic studies with a grain of salt. I mean, these are fundamentally lexicostatistical analyses, which don't necessarily replace the comparative method in establishing relationships, but at least they give you some indication of relative time depth. At a minimum, they can give you a heuristic of relative time depth. And the numbers that are coming out are that the Northeast Indian phyla really have extraordinary time depth, both within the Trans-Himalayan family and sort of in general. So at the time, these sorts of time scales, 5,000 to 6,000 years. We're talking about some of the earliest stages of Indo-European, right? This is the sort of time depth that we're dealing with in phyla that are in many cases spoken right next to each other. So if you think of Borogaru and Tani, Mishmi, if that's an appropriate term to use, we're not entirely sure. But anyway, these phyla are spoken. You can walk from one phylum to the other, and the time depth seems to be on the order of 5,000 years. That's just amazing, right? Where in the world can you get that sort of diversity? Well, again, Papua New Guinea, this area is also an area that, although it's undergoing rapid change now in many ways, still one can find pockets, I don't know if that's the right term to use, of areas that have changed relatively little and relatively slowly over the past 100 years at least, and seem to preserve lots of aspects of ways that people have been doing things for hundreds and thousands of years that can be simply observed, right? These are traditions that have enabled them to survive in these environments and thrive, and they're continuing to practice them because why would you change when you have something so good? So the rest of us can, of course, learn a lot about the ways that people have lived in these environments for, again, millennia, apparently, according to the evidence that we have. And we can learn a lot about things that were probably a lot more widespread in our perhaps no longer in most of the Asian mainland. So it's just extraordinary to have these opportunities. But as I mentioned, it's of course now undergoing change, in some areas more rapid than others, but I think in terms of the overall timescales, it's all very rapid. Contrasting with the idyllic village of Milang village of Bukamori that I showed earlier, here we have Itanagar on the left, which I don't know if would it be rude of me to call that a vision of hell. I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody necessarily likes it there. This is in some ways an amazing place, right? It's a place where lots of people who speak lots of different languages from lots of different backgrounds come together and they're in the same place, and that can be very exciting. But it also is an environment in which languages are lost within a single generation, and with virtual certainty. And of course, we all know that there are geopolitical threats of even greater potential change that are regularly trotted out when it suits these major powers. Well, does any of this matter? Change is sort of normal. It's part of humanity's experience of living in the world. It's certainly been argued that people like ourselves, I don't know, are prone to romanticize things and perhaps, attribute ideas and motives, etc., wishes, desires to people that they don't necessarily have. It's certainly true that some people choose to, in some sense stop speaking their native language, so stop transmitting their language to their children. Well, yes, that's sometimes true. One can, of course, ask the question whether people are necessarily offered a reasonable choice when they allegedly make that choice. I'll come back to that in a second, but it certainly matters to science. I don't probably need to belabor this point to this audience, but Evans and Levinson in a seminal article made it quite clear that loss and even rapid sudden change of language leads to the loss of information that is really important to us as scientists in our efforts to understand human cognition, human communication, human society, and its evolution over time and space. But more, that's almost an unarguable point. But more to the point, our experience is that most people in at least the region that we've been working in really do care. And this is not just our opinion or our sort of biased sample. We can see this simply by watching the efforts that community members and organizations make to do something, to do whatever they can to sustain their languages and their cultures throughout these kinds of emerging scenarios in which they're under all these pressures to change and abandon their traditional ways of doing things. So there's really an enormous amount of documentary descriptive work needed. I won't venture to estimate the amount needed versus the amount that we already have, but suffice to say that there's way more needed than we have. We barely even scrape the surface. Okay. And yet, there's a problem, there's several problems that we face. Research permission is still extremely difficult for most non-Indian scholars to obtain. In some areas more than others. In the area that Yankee and I mainly work in, Arunachal Pradesh, it's practically impossible. You can count the number of people who've obtained it on a single hand. So that's just, a real disincentive. There are domestic efforts that, some are better than others. So the new linguistic Survey of India and People's Linguistic Survey of India were some recent sort of large-scale efforts that have produced results. I don't mean to trivialize what they've done. These have been massive efforts, but I think that most people would have to conclude that they're really not meeting most documentary and descriptive needs, much less sort of sustainability needs that we can argue to exist. I apologize if the third bullet point offends anybody, but I just find myself in awe of the disengagement of anthropologists in the modern era. And that's probably all I need to say. Even if if all these things weren't true and we had ideal research circumstances, I think with the number of people working at the speed that we're able to work, even in the best set of circumstances, our traditional models are unlikely to meet the needs that exist. We just sort of can't do it, But who's we, right? When I say we, I mean traditional academics. But we noticed very quickly through the course of our own research, almost by accident, that there's this sort of obvious connection that is not being made here, which is that community members are directly engaged already, in many cases extremely competent, in many cases highly educated, in many cases very enthusiastic, in many cases with a bit of time, spare time, that they're willing to devote to things, in many cases actually interested in being involved in a formal context. There's this sort of resource is not exactly the right word, but there's this additional force that is available to be brought in. So as I say, we sort of noticed this almost by accident, because both of us were focused on becoming academics, professional linguists, and I think I can speak for Yankee in saying that was the aim, right? Certainly was mine. Never occurred to me when I started out on my PhD that I'd be doing anything other than the intellectual work of writing a grammar of a language and then teaching about the grammars of languages, et cetera, in some academic context. Never thought that I'd be doing anything related to, more applied dimensions of this sort of work. But through the process of working with people who know a lot about their language and know about a lot about their culture and have a deep abiding interest in this, and were involved in what we were doing because they start out as our consultants and then they become our assistants and partners, and they're sort of doing it with us. So it just sort of leads naturally to, okay, well, let's make a project out of this. What do you want to do? So Yankee started doing some work on Milang oral literature, and so I started working with the Galo community. This is a little bit asynchronous, but it has to do with time durations. I started working with, how should I put it, several community members on a project called Galo Poetic Language and Literature. So the idea here was basically to find them some money to do some stuff. And we managed to do that, but then it was just sort of like, my goodness, I mean, this model works. We can do so much more if community members and groups are sort of taking the reins and running projects like this. But the sort of longest term collaboration that I have is with the Galo Language Development Committee. And this has just been astonishing because they've managed to do an incredible amount of work. I partnered with them to greater or lesser degrees at various times, but it just sort of demonstrated to me how much this mattered and how much people were willing to invest in developing programs to, in this case, both document and produce materials to help sustain their language. And really what they just needed was, well, it's not, I don't mean to say, but basically training and support, and in some cases, partnership in one way or another. So this is sort of the background that we brought into putting together the CCLD. And so what did we want to do with it? Obviously engage with community members in the Eastern Himalayan region. And we wanted to be able to provide training in basic language and culture documentation skills. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are. To fund, equip, and support their projects, which was a big, big question. Could we find the money to do that, right? Finding money is always hard, right? And facilitate discoverability of projects, especially through archiving. Through this also to foster partnerships between community researchers and academics, whether they're Indian or international, and help build a community of like-minded researchers in this region. So how does it work? Well, it sort of starts with the training program I mentioned earlier, training and resources for Indigenous community linguists. So historically, we've had this in Napit village in Pasigat, nearby to Pasigat in Arunachal Pradesh. This year, we're going to be running it in Itanagar. So it's going to have a slightly different feel, but hopefully recognizable. And I've just put our one of our schedules up there. I don't know if I need to go through everything, but it gives you an idea of the types of things that we're doing. Basically, we teach a particular workflow that starts with making a good recording, an audiovisual recording, extracting the file, doing data file management, backing things up, doing all the things you need to do so that you don't lose your files or corrupt them, etc. And then we use Seymour both for project management and metadata, but also as an environment in which to do transcription and translation. And then we sort of move from there to subtitling videos, which is something that people seem to think that that would be a welcome outcome. So we teach that workflow. And what's useful about this is that this creates certain stop-off point products, if I can put it that way. So if we get a transcription, then that can be used in various ways. If we get a translation, that can be used in various ways, and it leads to follow-on work that our participants may or may not be in a position to do themselves. But if they can have a partner coming in at one point, then you can increase what they can do with this. And then we also do some work with dictionaries, or let's say lexicon construction, and how that can be done to feed into things like mobile apps. So that's mostly Kellen that runs that. Okay, that's in a nutshell. We do some other things as well. So from humble beginnings, right? So I probably don't need to talk over these names. I'm aware of the time, but this is just to give you a sort of flavor of what people feel like. So it's not just a sort of classroom environment in which we lecture at people. We teach practical skills, and then we go and do it. And then we go back and review it, and then we sort of do it again. So the idea is that people should be able to leave with the capacity to actually just go straight away, start doing what we just did and did again and did again. So, it's a very hands-on experience with very concrete outcomes. But there's also lots of fun to be had. So we make sure to take people on excursions as well. We're running out of things to take people to for repeat customers, but and we always have nice social events and parties at the end of the week. Okay, well, that's all fine and good. A lot of people run training programs, but what about the rest of the year? Well, this sort of was eating away at us for the first 3 iterations of Trickle, because we realized, like, oh my goodness, I mean, yeah, we teach people, but then they go home and they don't do it. Why aren't they doing it? And well, because people are busy, right? They've got other things. So we had to come up with a way to engage people and keep them motivated and moving throughout the year. So we started our Flickr Fellowships program, which are fellowships for Indigenous community researchers. I realized that there's an L in there, don't worry about that. So these are sort of 6 that are competitive because we can only manage to run 5 per year. That's just our capacity limitation. So we provide equipment and a stipend for our Flickr fellows, and we also provide field support and sort of technical advice and also motivation. I'll show you how that works. So say that Trickle produces a fellow in some sense. I hate these flip charts, but now that I have this administrative role at Sydney, I have to do all these kinds of silly things. Then we have a program manager who is Yankee, who basically interacts with the fellow throughout the project, I should say. And then when field support is needed, as it so often is, then we do have somebody there in India, in Arunachal Pradesh, who is trained to support people with equipment and software issues that come up. And if there's more advanced stuff needed, as there often is, for example, we have Kellen, who is available on call on WhatsApp to do that. And then the last step is interaction with CoRSAL, with an archive that, the archive we work with is, of course, CoRSAL. And CoRSAL is really an essential part of this, even though we're just sort of getting started with this stuff, because all this stuff on the right at some point is going to go away, right? We have no illusions that we're going to live forever, or that any of this stuff is going to go on forever. So there's still going to be potentially a fellow who is then able to continue to work with the archive. And CoRSAL is an archive that is specifically designed. It's probably the only archive that's specifically designed to work directly with people like our Flickr fellows and the communities that they're members of, and of course, researchers and institutions that would want to access those outcomes. On the topic of which, I'm going to turn over to Yankee now.
Thank you. So I'll quickly go over some of the things that we have done so far, and so from 2022 to 2023, we had 5 projects, and can I go to the next slide? So these were Flickr fellows. So the first one is Anuja Biso. She's from Russo Aka community, and her project was the title was Seasons of Life, Birds, Plants, and People Through the Year. Basically, a lot of files. She did a recording of lots of files that encompasses a lot of traditional ecological knowledge of the Russo speakers, a lot of files on cyclical event, basically the interactions between Russo speakers and their environment. And this is a huge file, and so far she has done 15% of them is being transcribed, translated into Arunachal Hindi, and now at present it's being processed in India, and it will be very soon coming to CoRSAL. So Mary, be prepared. So the next one is Johaksu Manyu. Johaksu Manyu is a Taura speaker. He's from Taura community, Anjao district, Arunachal Pradesh. And Johaksu was interested in a very interesting topic, which was the oral history and migration and the settlement of all the Taura clans. So what he have done, in fact, is he brought all these 14 people, men, basically from all different clans, and he made oral recordings, and all these are transcribed, translated into English. It's almost about 2 hours, and this will be coming to CoRSAL 2 very soon. Okay, the next one is, this is Jyotise Yobin. So not the one with the head, but the one who is sitting on your left. So he's a young Yobin community member. So he's from Gandhigram, Vijayanagar. Please don't have any illusion as this Vijayanagar and Gandhigram, since it's an Indic name, would be some towns. These two places is one of the most unreachable place even in the standard of Arunachal Pradesh. I mean, for Jyotise in the winter, it took him 3 days to join us in Trickle. So in summer, he said sometimes it takes like 5 or 7 a week to get into the nearest town. So Jyotise belongs to Yobin tribe, and Yobin is a small group. They're in the border of between India and Burma, and even in terms of the indigenous group being marginalized, Yobin had a very difficult time because most of its history they were not recognized as an indigenous tribe even within India, and they had to suffer a lot. I think recently there have been there has been some changes in their official recognition, but what Jyotise was focusing here for his project was this craftsmanship, the skill craftsmanship that Yobin have. I mean, among the tribes, they are already known for their skill. I mean, basically their skill, their artistic knowledge about, crafting things like baskets, the wood products. I mean, a lot of
Weapons also.
Yeah, weapons. I mean, the way they would design weapons. I mean, bowstring,
Well, crossbows.
Crossbows, and all this, and all these materials. They source it from the forest they live in. And this is not going to happen forever because recently this area have been charted out to be under tiger reserve, so they have been having a lot of problem. But at the same time, what Jyotise really wanted to focus was to document the knowledge that is, because he lived in this village, so he could see that the knowledge of this all this craftsmanship was not being transferred down to the young generations, because most of these villages do not have middle secondary schools. Starting from, they have small primary schools, but to go to middle secondary schools, they have to move out from the village, and they have not been learning these skills at all. So Jyotise has a huge audio-visual file recordings of all, they're like hours of how a particular baskets are made. But unfortunately, he haven't had time to do transcription translation yet. He has just recently become a father and has just joined as a teacher in a new school. So, but hopefully we will continue to work with him. Okay, then the other next part, Flickr fellow is Tasi Shewang. He's from Dakpa community from Bhutan, and Tasi's project was on Bonism. So Bonism is the pre-Buddhist, I don't know if I should call it religion, but more like a ritual.
Ritual knowledge system.
And basically, which is like unofficially banned in Bhutan. But Tashi knew that these practices are still there in all these pockets, small pockets, villages. So Tashi has about 190 GB audio video files, and he had 25% transcribed, translated into Ilan, and now this is with CoRSAL. Okay, the last fellow, this is Abraham Modi. So he's from the Milang community, which is the same as me, but Abraham and me, we are not from the same village again. So Milang has 3 villages. So Abraham is from Pakumodi. So what I'll do is
which is the village that I showed in that slide earlier.
Yeah. So I'll do a little bit more in depth. I'll talk about a little bit more about him because this is also personal to me. And the topic that he chose was food making process from Tachi. Tachi is a tree fern. And so I'll just give us a small background of why this was, why I think this is something we really valued. So like most Eastern Himalayan group, Milang practice grain agriculture. So like dry rice cultivation, millet, job steers, in addition to hunting and foraging. But recently, this was also, until recently, this was also balanced with veggie culture, which is like sago and tree fern cultivation, which I'll just show you. I'll be showing you, and then also yam, taro. These are all the things that you can harvest. You don't have to grow them like rice and millet. So Abraham grew up in Milang, in the Milang speaking area, but he did not know about all this, especially about the valence of veggie culture. So until he started looking for the project topics and he started asking people, can I go to the next slide, please? So, and it turned out that many people alive today knew everything about Milang veggie culture tradition. So this is veggie culture of sago culture and also of tree fern culture. So what happened was, as he was interacting with these people, what he found was that the Milang jungle is not just a jungle. There is plantations of all these, and which are still intact. Every clan group has its own tree fern cultivations and also sago plant cultivations. And not only that, all the knowledge of tools and methods, vocabularies were all intact. So Abraham traveled days into the jungle to document and learn about every aspect of food productions from the tree farm, from people who still practiced how to process them, because it's not something that you just go down and you just cut down a tree and you know how to process a starch like basically flour out of a tree fern. And why I thought that it would be important to highlight this as a part of our CoRSAL talk is because this is not just Abraham going and doing a documentation. He is actually learning himself. He is also participating with all the process, because the whole process takes days for basically involve how to ferment them and how to get the flour, the starch out of the tree fern. And what we have, what is the result from this is the world's first documentation of veggie culture in the Siang Basin, which we've never done before, and it has a very high potential ethno-linguistic significance, very high potential cultural value to Milang community. We have about 2 hours of audio video file transcribed and translated into English, and which is with CoRSAL now. And on your right, this is how Abraham's data look like.
In Seymour.
Yeah, in Seymour. Oh, and quickly before, go to the next slide, please. Yeah, quickly before I end, I wanted to show you how many more interesting projects are going on right now, and how it's going to be with CoRSAL soon. We have
soon meaning next year.
Next year, yeah. Okay. So right now these projects are going on, and they are working on their text analysis right now. Is the first one is Hari Apralo from Idumisni community, and he's working on documentation of Mra. This is arrow poison, and he's working with some of the last speakers who knows about arrow poison in their community. We have Sonam from Brokat community. The Brokat community is about only 300 speakers left in Bhutan, in the remote part of Bhutan. She's working on the cultural significance of buckwheat. We have Rimitadu from Apatani community, again doing a documentation on salt making called tapio, with some of the last people. This is basically women who had this knowledge, and some of the last people who knows how to make indigenous salt among the Apatani tribe.
Should say what it's from, like from it's not from like salt, right?
Yeah,
not from
yeah,
rock salt.
from
So
plant ash.
from plant ash.
Yeah, how they did distill. I mean, there will be more coming up from her. And then we have Tage Umbre, again from Idumishimi community. He's doing a project on Idumishimi traditional textiles. And the last, Nanman Jugali is doing a traditional marriage system of the Jugali community. So this is Tangsa community, and also working with some of the last group who know about traditional marriage system, because almost 99 maybe percent of Tangsas have become Christian. I mean, very long time back, the missionary spread there much before than in the East, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of has changed, but there are few people alive today who knows. Who had been married with the traditional system. So he's doing a documentation on them. So that's all for now. So that will be coming to you, Mary, very soon.
Next year. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. We're going to try to finish up by the sort of standard 40 minutes, and that leaves 1.5 minutes left. Okay, so we're just going to give a brief summary of the sort of outlook. So in 2024, we have a new partnership with Rajiv Gandhi University Arunachal Institute for Tribal Studies. So I mentioned earlier that Jilpa Modi, who works there, is on our board. So that of course is wonderful, and we can hopefully develop this relationship. And like every organization, we hope to grow, but slowly, because we don't sort of want to do anything that we can't guarantee outcomes from. So we're trying not to spread ourselves too thinly. But we do have one major desideratum, and so this is sort of like a call to all of you. We're always looking for dedicated, intrepid, and ethically aware PhD students. That doesn't have to be PhD students, I mean, MA students or whatever, but students who are willing to partner with a Flickr Fellow, and also to help with Trickle. So those are volunteer roles, of course, but we pay for people's travel, and we make it fun. So one current collaboration is one of my students, Rolf Hutz, who's doing his PhD on a description of Dara. And he's working closely with Johaxo Manyu, the Flickr Fellow that Yankee spoke about just a minute ago. So this is just wonderfully productive for both of them. Okay, so finishing up, community engagement, I think, is certainly a strong desideratum. It's sort of uncontroversially nowadays, well, what's not controversial, but anyway, I think most of us can agree that this is an ethical imperative, right? But in a sense, more to the point, it's a scientific imperative, right? Because it increases the quantity of the work that we're able to produce, and if done well, it can certainly enhance the quality of the work that gets produced. But it's hard to do this when everybody's sort of distributed everywhere, have to continually reinvent the wheel. This is something that's been discussed in the literature. So lots of community members are going to be trained within individual products to varying degrees, and they're sort of disconnected. And when this sort of training and engagement happens, it's kind of hard to sustain it beyond the grant cycle or whatever project you're engaged in. Most people at the end of the day need to support their families and themselves, of course. And so the reality is most scholars end up, suffering in administrative drudgery, like I am. And people who are language consultants when they're younger often need to then just get a job and support their families. I mean, same as everybody, right? So you don't sort of have time to do all this in your spare time effectively. And things may be different in the US or wherever you happen to be based, but my experience is that few, if any, institutions, in Australia at least, are genuinely willing. It's hard to attribute agency to an institution, but anyway, the so-called leadership of these institutions are not generally willing to back up their pleasant promises with actual resources or recognition for this sort of work. At least that's been my experience, our experience, I think. So institution-independent programs and projects like the CCLD can address some of these problems. And here I'd also mention that there are other organizations where by no means not the only or the original. So just off the top of my head, the Endangered Language Alliance in New York is in a very different way, extremely productive and operates in a similar sort of way. So it can facilitate partnerships that are not necessarily bound to being one's particular student or a community that neither of us have anything to do with DACPA communities, but we can certainly support workers from them. Can front load training before projects start, and can bring together people who have or need different types of skills or access, and can help fund and sustain, and motivate is a really important word here, and also troubleshoot projects. It's just amazing to consider sometimes how, I hate to make it sound trivial, but some of the roadblocks that get encountered are like not being able to find a particular folder in Windows, and that can cause people to lose months of work. It's just if you have somebody there who can troubleshoot things like that, it really helps. But of course, this kind of work also depends very heavily on the kindness and generosity of lots and lots of people who donate their time and resources. So we'd like to finish by thanking many of these people, the current and former Trickle staff. Unsurprisingly, one finds Stephen Morey at the top of this list because he is a repeat contributor to Trickle, and also Scott Delancey, Uta Reinl, Pavel Ozerov, Linda Connerth, Mika Mulder, Prafula Basumatri, Nora Muheim, Rolf Hotz, and one of our audience members today, I think I saw his name, Mosiel Kalling, who has not only been a Trickle participant, but also a teacher. And really, we'd like to thank the Firebird Foundation for Anthropological Research, who have been sponsoring us since the outset and enabling this work. And we're also partnering with one of their projects, the Bhutan Oral Literature Project, which sort of explains why we have these people coming from Bhutan. And of course, we'd like to thank CoRSAL, and particularly Shobhana and Mary, for their extraordinary contribution to this. And with that, we'd like to thank you for your attention, and we welcome any questions or comments you have.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Absolutely, we would like to take some time to take some questions. There was a lot of information there, a lot of great work being done. And so let me just turn it over to the audience and maybe put your hand up, and then we can take your questions that way. Or Mary, we can also look in the chat to see if there's any questions going.
So far in the chat, we have a thank you from Sada.
Sada, yeah.
And then Anna Luisa is saying, brilliant presentation. Does your org ever accept interns from the US to work remotely or in person?
Well, I don't see why not. Yeah, we don't have any guidelines regarding the status or location of or origin of anybody that we work with. So we're really just interested in finding people who are really genuinely dedicated, is really the key criterion, right?
Yeah, but maybe remotely, it will be
adaptable.
Yeah, remotely.
Oh, remotely or in person?
Yeah.
So okay, so that's I assume by remotely you mean so that they won't actually. So there is some capacity for some of what we provide is remote, but that's one of the more difficult aspects of things, I have to say. So in India in particular, in my experience, other parts of the world similar, it's really important to be there face to face with people and establish relationships and understanding.
First.
At least at first,
and then you can build on to that, and then maybe even work remotely I mean,
Yeah. So Yankee and Kellen are able to do some of what they do, well, a lot of what they do remotely, but that's only because they're first there for weeks and months and establish relationships, and then when you get know people quite well, then it's possible to work with them remotely. But it's very hard to just sort of start out or do that exclusively, I suppose.
I would think the experience for the intern would also be much richer if they were able to go for a little while and really understand the issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't see any questions right off. There are some more comments. Let me just ask a question. Maybe that'll start off, and then Sadaf does have a comment. We'll get to that one. What are the what do the community members feel about the whole process, from the collection to the analysis part of it to the archiving piece? I know they want to preserve and retain the knowledge. How do they feel about this kind of more scientific nature of what needs to be done to reach their goals, or technical nature, maybe?
Should I take that?
yeah.
You take that. Yeah, well, it's a hard question to answer. First of all, just because I'm not sure that I can sort of answer that on behalf of community members in general, but I guess maybe the way I would approach that is by saying that I think a lot of these goals would be potentially complementary, and so it's I sort of don't think of anything that's going on here as exclusive of anything else or in conflict with anything else. So, maybe the best way to approach this would be to talk about Rolf Hotz and Joe Hoxo's partnership. So, Rolf is a PhD student who has been told by me to write a grammar of Taran, and that is what he has to do. And everything else is more or less, what he can do in his spare time. And that's often the case for PhD students, right? Now, so he has a bunch of stuff that he has to do to analyze the language. But Joe Hoxo is interested in working out, as many people are there, the origins of the clans and the histories of the clans, etc. These are, in some sense, distinct goals, but they're entirely complementary, because through the same processes of data collection and processing, you can reach both outcomes. There's a point at which they diverge to some extent, but Joe Hoxo's data is always going to be valuable to Rolf. Rolf's skills are always going to be valuable to Joe Hoxo. And so I think that although there might be some parts of the world in which there's a longer history of people coming, say, from American universities or European universities or whatever, and kind of taking data and not leaving anything behind, or not really engaging with people. I guess there's a few things I'd say about that. First of all, that doesn't characterize the entire planet. So your experiences may vary depending on what part of the world you're from. So in this part of the world, that there wasn't a long history of that happening. The other thing I'd say about that, I suppose, is that it might be a little bit unfair to project back into the mid-early 20th century, today's sort of technological environment and sort of transportation environment, and
Uh-oh, I'm frozen.
Uh-oh, me too.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. They said they may have an interruption in their connection, so we'll just give them a second to rejoin, or maybe buffer.
Yeah.
We'll see.
They said they would get on their phone if they needed to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
At least it happened at the very end.
That's right. That's right. So let's see. There are questions that are. Sadaf had a comment. And Javier. So there are a couple more comments to do here.
Yeah, they were just now
They're reconnecting on their
exiting, so
phone.
let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, I see that Living Tongues is here. Ana Luisa is from Living Tongues. That's great. And she notes that they're looking for opportunities to contribute to research projects. Most of their interns are remote, I guess. Okay. Ana Luisa, how does that work? How do your interns, what does that mean that they're remote, and are they working for Living Tongues that's in the United States? Is that what you mean?
Yes, thank you so much for taking my question. I'm from Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages. First of all, this was a fantastic presentation. I learned so much about their organization. It's so awesome. We have remote interns. Basically, we advertise once a year or so for different cohorts of interns, either working with our phonetics team. So we specifically recruit by putting out some social media messages and newsletters asking, mostly through professors that we know throughout North America. We always say, oh, we're looking for some linguistic students to help out on annotation and prot. And we teach them, but they usually have prior experience in prot. And then we get them involved in one of the documentation projects for one of the endangered languages we're working on. And they're always, after they complete the internship, which is usually 4 or 5 weeks, they're always like, oh, where can I go next? Is there any other internships that you know of? So they're always just hungry for, experiences and working on real data, not sanitized data that they get in school. And we also accept interns to work on our Living Dictionaries platform. And so those people are often recurring volunteers, also usually linguistics or anthropology students. And they're really talented, enthusiastic, and eager to make a difference. And so some of them come back 3, 4 times, and then they say, let me know if you hear of any other internships. So I always steer them in the direction of any cool opportunities that might arise. And yes, they work as volunteers, and they get, a formal certificate if they request that, and they commit to doing 4 or 5 weeks, and we provide them with training and regular Zoom meetings once a week. So there's a lot of support, and it's it's a program that we've honed over time. But I just wanted to see if there's any opportunities like that, and if there's not, that's totally understandable, because it does take a certain amount of dedication and capacity to make that happen. So
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Welcome back, Mark and
Thanks.
Yankee. You were just gone for such a small time that we only got to that one comment. Sadaf has a comment. Sadaf Munshi from UNT. She said, inaccessibility to the linguistic communities for research and documentation, as far as getting permissions is concerned. This has become an ongoing challenge, especially with continuing political instability. I guess she means not just with the community, but from the larger, from the government to get in there. How best to increase access and visibility of the archived materials. Yeah, that's a question we wanted to bring up as well, Sadaf. So if I understood the first question, it's about getting permissions from the government to be working.
Yeah, that's right. It's been very difficult, especially now in India.
Communities are working on their own, right? So I'm assuming that.
So there are different challenges, right? I mean, communities working on their own, they don't have the necessary, I guess, funding and all that. And some of them have training, but that's another ongoing challenge. And then we have these new restrictions on research. There are additional restrictions now.
Are there?
Especially in India. You have to get, earlier we didn't need permission. At least I didn't need permission to work in India, do any research, but now I do. Mm-hmm. So that's become more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, in some sense, this has been going on for a long time, but in some ways it is getting worse. Certainly not getting better. But all the more reason that we need to develop partnerships with community members who are not going away anytime soon, and are not subject to the same restrictions, and want to see this research happen. So that's really another really good reason, another good motivation for this kind of engagement.
Yeah, my understanding is that for training, you don't need the same kind of research clearances. So that may be, one way at it. So you capacity build, but you're not necessarily just going.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Sadaf, one way, I mean, the way I've worked out is if they have an organization there in India,
Yeah.
the community can put a notice to whatever concerned government. You can start with the district collector's office and inform them, and that we are going to organize such and based on that you can issue an invitation to the person that you want to come to that community. So that can work out within the community, or you can tie up with a university to do that.
So long as an official organization issues a notice and an invitation.
And as long as you have a stamp, an official stamp. And what I also target is some sort of a media, local news. I would call them and then just press release that this is happening, so that it's not under the IB. At least in Northeast. So in Jammu and Kashmir, there is always this IVs intelligence bureau. So what I do is just press released, and it's not something we are doing it in concern. And if there are community members and members from some local members, there put their names along with the person whom you have invited. So that makes it like an open.
So it just shows that you're not sort of hiding anything.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat from Javier Lopez, who says, you had mentioned about the risk of languages being lost in an area where multiple languages are spoken. I think I heard that by the next generation it is lost. How do we know where there's a risk of language loss? And he says, I'm sorry, that might be a simple answer, but thank you for the presentation. So I guess, how do we know what language is going to be lost?
I can answer that because I'm an example of that. So I was born in the Abraham slide that I saw. That's my village. But because that place does not have a school, my parents wanted to send me to a school. So we moved out to the nearest town. And there's not many Milang speakers there. We were the only house, even in that small groups. We were the only groups, and the school that I went to, it's the most of the major spoken, the language that's spoken there is called Adi. Now that has become my native language, right? Now Milang has become my heritage language, which is just in one generation, and that's how we lose language. And now I have kids. I'm not confident enough to tell them stories or scold them, yell at them in Milang. No, I can do that only in Adi. And in this generation, I lost my language, and there are many hundred of people like me in the whole of Northeast.
Well, basically everybody who moves out of the Milang area.
So that's a classic case, I guess.
Your example. We're going to have to run, but Anna Roshley, we will end with her comment, if that's okay, because we have to get on with the rest of our program. She says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm really interested in the materials that are being developed and archived that aren't necessarily pure linguistic materials, but materials about cultural traditions and community memory. And she asks, are there specific challenges or successes with that? I guess a pure linguistic material might be something like elicited material that is targeted.
So that one thing that with all these materials that we are also learning as we are doing, and we are also realizing many things as we are doing. And so far what we have noticed is the case with Abraham, where he himself is growing on an area where these languages are spoken, but a lot of the traditions that he's that guy who was actually showing him is his father's generations. So his father's what they knew is, that there is a sudden gap of, because there is the modern world has just reached, you start going to schools, and then there was this traditional sort of a knowledge world which is just broken. So what we see as a value among even communities is how do they keep that, right? How do they connect to that? And even if they see that, they can still have that recording, how will Abraham keep it in his phone or in his computer? And that's where we go in and tell him, the best way is you can save it with CoRSAL. You can, and if more, you can also work, you can also translate. And that's what motivates him, rather than, just doing linguistic work. He's not a linguistic student at all.
So if I can just add one thing, I'm aware of the time, so maybe this can be where we end. So, I mean, you're right to point out that so that you wouldn't be able to write a grammar based on simply only the data that one of these Flickr fellows produces. It wouldn't be feasible. But if you are able to do a lot of the work that linguists are trained to do, so elicitation and various other types of text elicitation and analysis, then this becomes an additional resource that that can fold directly into your work. So we're not providing a full documentation and description of languages by any means, and nothing that we're doing is going to lead to that. But assuming that a trained linguist from anywhere in the world comes along, and it could even be one of our Flickr fellows who subsequently gets linguistics training, will be able to use this as a resource towards that end, and will make that a richer overall presentation. So that's basically how we think about it.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation and for all the great questions that we had. We could keep talking about this, and you're doing such an incredible work. We're looking forward to all the deposits that are coming in.